Hey, this is Josh Green. Wanted to hop on here, make a quick little video case study tutorial. I often get sent deals, a piece of land, and the question is always, how much could you pay for this? And so I wanted to do a little walkthrough of how I look at things, how I think other builders and developers look at land and decide how much they can pay for things. My background is appraisal, and so you can always look at comps. You can look and see what other people are paying for land. That's useful to kind of help narrow it down. But every project is different and has different costs associated with it. And so it's really best to kind of do the analysis that I'm about to show you here. So let me pull up my little tool here. So really the best way is really to kind of back into it. And that means that you need to know how many units you can build. You need to know what your costs are, and you can kind of back into, okay, what can I pay for the land that will make this deal work? And so I've built this kind of little tool here for the Impact Development Collaborative. Um, but really, let's say we're looking at a piece of property. It's listed for $900,000. Okay, and this is something that we want to do for sale townhomes on. And let's say we've done our homework, we've looked through zoning, talked to the city, everything. We feel pretty confident that we can fit 24 units. Okay, so we're going to start at the very end, right? What can you sell those units for? Well, let's say we have 24 units. Um, Other similar units in the area are selling for 450. Okay, so we can, you know, our best guess, knowing today's facts in this hypothetical situation are, we could sell these units for about almost $11 million when it's all said and done. Okay, but there's going to be some costs associated with selling those units, right? There's buyers commissions, there's sellers commissions, there's closing costs, all these things, right? So let's just plug in here. You're paying the buyers and the seller's agent. Maybe you are the seller, so you could adjust that, accordingly if you're an agent also. Um, and let's say you've got 0.5% of closing costs, right? So this is your net revenue, right? So your total potential revenue minus your sales cost. This is your net revenue. So we're paying, almost $600,000 in commissions and closing costs to be able to sell these 24 units. Okay, so we've got net revenue of $10.2 million roughly. Okay, so that's the first step. Now, what does it cost to build this thing, right? So let's say we've talked to our contractor, maybe you are the contractor. It's going to cost $7 million in hard costs. Okay, and so hard costs is everything from putting in the improvements, putting in the utilities, roads, all the way up through foundations, framing, finishing everything out. So let's just say we're $7 million total in hard costs, in actual construction costs. Okay, there's other costs associated with this, right? You got to pay an architect, you got to pay an engineer, you've got to pay the city their permit and impact fees, um, financing costs, insurance, all these other things, right? And so this kind of varies, but a kind of general rule of thumb is, this is probably around somewhere around 20%. That's all your soft costs, right? So any other costs that are not associated with actual building structures. Okay, and this land is listed at $900,000. Okay, so in this example, our total costs are $9.3 million. Our net revenue, our total revenue after paying closing costs, commissions, is 10.2 million. So that leaves us a profit of about $900,000, right? So this is kind of where you decide, right? Is this worth your time um, to go through all the work to build this, sell it for $900,000, right? And that's an individual choice. A lot of builders, they will look at either a gross margin or a net margin. And typically a home builder would like to see that net margin, which is this profit, $900,000 divided by the net revenue, right? That's a percentage of 10 plus is kind of a general rule of thumb. So, if you need to really be at that 10%, right, and you feel good about all your other assumptions, the only other variable left is the land, right? So this is kind of where we get to how much can I pay for this property, for the land, to make this deal work. Well, if you need to make a minimum of a 10% net margin, then that means this land price has got to go down, right? So you can kind of start playing with this, you know, can you buy it for 850, right? That gets you a little bit closer. Could you buy it for 800? Okay, that gets you even closer. So this is kind of where this is if you feel good about your other assumptions about your costs, this is how you back into what can you pay for the land, um, and still meet your return threshold, right? Or your profit threshold. In this case, maybe you needed to make $1 million, or your goal was to make $1 million. Okay, that looks like it's possible if you can get the land for $800,000 instead of $900,000, right? So that's kind of the quick high level overview, and I think it's important for people that are listing land for sale to kind of have this kind of math in mind, right? To be able to back into, okay, what could a builder actually pay for this property, and kind of know some of these costs, right? If you're listing a property, you should talk to the city. You should know how many units, how many lots could fit on it. You should have an idea of what the costs are to build it, and price your land accordingly. I see a lot of deals where they're just overpriced, and that's a hard situation to be in, where you've set your seller's expectations at a certain number, and you start getting in offers that are less than that, right? Consistently less than that. They're probably doing this math, right? They're backing into, okay, how much can I pay for this property, and still make it work, still make a profit. Everyone needs to make money on the deal, right? The seller needs to make money. The agents that are selling it need to make money. You as the developer need to make money. And so there's got to be a little bit of a give and take there to make a deal happen. But anyway, I hope this is helpful. We can do the same thing for rent. Okay, so let's say, and it's kind of a similar process, right? So you just kind of zero some of these things out here. Let's say the same scenario, right? Property's listed for $900,000. Let's assume our costs are the same, right? We're building the same product. Maybe this is townhomes for rent. Okay, so our costs here are the same. The difference is we're going to be looking at revenue, at net revenue, instead of net sales price, right? So what you do here is you look at your comps. What are other things renting for that are similar to what you're planning on building, and you figure out what the annual rental income is, right? So I don't know, just throwing in some numbers here. Let's say it's $2,500 a month times 24 units times 12 months. Okay. You'll likely have some other income on top of that. So just for fees and pet rent and all those other kind of things. So let's just say that's another $2,000 a year times for each unit. Whoops. Should be a plus there. Okay. Okay, so here's what your potential income is on this project, right? You've got to subtract out vacancy and bad debt. Maybe that's 5%, maybe that's 6%. And then expenses. You can talk to a property manager. You can look at other properties in the area. This is generally, depending. Everything is specific to the product, right? And maybe this is 25%, right? Because you get pretty good rent on townhomes compared to what it costs to operate it, right? So maybe that's 25%. So your net operating income, your net income, your potential income minus vacancy minus expenses is $530,000. Okay. Then we've got to look at, what's the value of this property, right? And so that's where a cap rate comes in. Okay, so now we've got to look at a cap rate. We've got to look at what's the value of this property once it's built, once it's rented, once it's stabilized. And we do that through a cap rate, a capitalization rate. And basically what that is you take your net operating income, you divide that by the cap rate. And you can look up cap rates, you can talk to brokers, appraisers about what current cap rates are. And the math here is it's just your net operating income divided by what the cap rate is. Okay, so our value here, assuming a 5.5% cap rate, is $9.6 million. Okay, it's going to cost us $9.3 million to build it. There's a spread there, right? Like you want to come out of this thing with it being worth more than it costs to build. There's a spread there. And so, again, it's an individual choice, right? Do you feel good enough about all of your other assumptions, and do you feel good about, the added value of, $300,000 by the time you've gone through all this process, right? Does that work for you, I guess, as an individual, as a developer, or for your investors, right? It's a little slim. And so another way to look at this is called yield on cost. And it's kind of similar math to a cap rate, but you take your yield, which is your net operating income, and divide it by your total costs. And that gives you your yield on cost. And most investors, developers, they want to see a spread between what the current cap rate is and what the yield on cost is. So that's kind of when we look at the difference between, the value of $9.6 million and the cost of $9.3 million. A lot of developers, investors want to see a spread there of at least 1 to 1.5% over what the current cap rate is. So in this case, we're pretty close. Like I said, there's not a lot of margin here, and that might be okay for some people, right? But if you are one of these investors or developers that wants to see a bigger spread, to feel more comfortable about it, then we can go back to, okay, what can I pay for the land, right? And so, if we're shooting for, let's say we need to be 1% above current cap rate. So that would mean that yield on cost would need to be 6.5%, right? Okay, so now we can start playing with the land. Like what would this need to be to make it work? Okay, so we can start going down. And you'll find it's going to take quite a bit. We could probably put in 0 here, and we still don't get there, right? So this is one of the challenges of trying to do deals today is with costs where they are, with cap rates where they are, it's hard to get that kind of spread on a development deal for a rental project. So I hope that's helpful, kind of going through the two scenarios. And obviously, you would do a lot more work than this. This is kind of the high level math of how I look at things, how other developers, how other builders look at things when they're looking at land and trying to figure out how much they can pay for something. So I hope that's helpful. If you have any questions, happy to chat about it. Leave me a comment or reach out to me on LinkedIn, and would be happy to chat about it. But I hope that's helpful.